Will a government decision in Dallas impact you? Let's talk about it. Welcome everyone. Mark here with Uber Hints, and it is terrible here. Well, it's not terrible if you love snow. We are in the midst of a snowstorm here in the Midwest. It continues on until 6 p.m. this evening, so by the time you watch this, it might be over with. Predictions are 8 to 12 inches. I think we're going to get there to 12 inches. Then, for the rest of the week, it's going to get cold. And I mean bitter cold. Actual temperatures of minus 25 to minus 30 degrees. Wind chills of over minus 50 degrees. Good Lord. Someone asked me, why would anyone want to live in Wisconsin? We will save that for another video. But I'm telling you, even with this weather, people are out and about. There are a hardy breed of people in the north, right? I checked my app and we are not even surging. So anyway, what is this about the decision in Dallas? I came across an article online. It was on QZ.com, and I will tell you right out of the gate, this was written with a real political slant. A lot of editorializing in this piece. I took out as much of that as I could because I don't want this channel to be a political channel. As far as commentary, well, we'll leave that up to me because that's what I do here, right? So let's take a look. Buried in the news of the U.S. federal shutdown ending was a government decision that has staggering implications for Uber and companies like it. Boy, it's hard to ignore that kind of an opening, isn't it? On January 25th, the National Labor Relations Board, which is abbreviated NLRB, ruled in a 3-to-1 vote that shuttle van drivers for Super Shuttle are independent contractors, not employees. Now, for those of you who don't know what Super Shuttle is, I see it all over the place when I travel to airports. It's one of those shuttles that will take you back and forth from parking lots and that type of thing. The ruling strips Super Shuttle drivers in Dallas-Fort Worth, so this came down from largely DFW airport area, who has sought to organize of that right, so they cannot organize and collectively bargain. Protective bargaining is only granted to traditional employees. Now, we're going to get to how this affects us as Uber drivers, but I think you're already seeing where this is going. As Uber drivers, we have largely been denied the right to collectively bargain. Now, a lot of you may agree with that. And a lot of you would say, well, I don't want to be an employee. We will save that. Let's just table that for right now and go through this with an open mind just based on the facts. And then we'll come back to some of those thoughts that are certainly roiling around in your head right now. This case is not about Uber, and yet it's entirely about Uber. Super Shuttle's business model is a shabby, low-tech version of Uber. Okay, that is editorializing. I'm not saying it's shabby and low-tech. They are. The company enlists shuttle drivers who own their own vehicles and pay their on-the-job expenses. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It provides them with a dispatch system to receive ride requests. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The thesis on which the Labor Board based its decision that Super Shuttle drivers are not employees because they have total autonomy to set their own work schedule. It could easily have been penned by Uber. They're saying this, not me, but I think that quotation is really, really important. They have total autonomy to set their own work schedule. Because this is pretty much what Uber and Lyft have been hanging their argument on all along, isn't it? Here are the facts. It's about time. Super Shuttle drivers were employees with hourly wages, scheduled shifts, and company-owned vans until 2005. So this is quite a bit different than Uber in that we're talking about a group of drivers that at one time were employees. That year, Super Shuttle switched to a franchise model that cast drivers as independent business owners. Now, shifts of this type have been taking place in New York. Now, in New York, they have not deemed them to be independent business owners, but they're really changing the complexion of Uber with the way that they license drivers, and you know, it's just really becoming a different picture. So I'm not saying these are the same at all. I'm just saying it's interesting to me how this is morphing. As franchisees, drivers pay the company an initial franchise fee. For drivers in DFW, it's $500. A flat weekly fee to use the Super Shuttle brand and its dispatch system, $575, and a decal fee, $250. The drivers are required to supply their own shuttle van, and they give an average cost of about $30,000, for a total investment of up to $40,000. Super Shuttle sets the fares that customers pay. Now I'm looking at this, and I am saying a weekly flat fee of $575. That's a lot of money. And that's starting to sound a little bit like that other startup rideshare business whose name has been banned from my channel. I'm not saying it's going to remain that way, but for a while, I'm going to be a real stubborn Norwegian. All right, let's continue. Drivers' vehicles must meet stringent specifications per the franchise agreement. Seat 8 people, including the driver. Be no more than 5 years old. Be one of 5 acceptable models, so they tell you what vehicle you can drive. And use Super Shuttle's proprietary blue and yellow paint scheme and logo. That looks really, really familiar to me. Now they talk about what condition does a vehicle have to be in. Under a 130-page contract, Super Shuttle signed with Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, the vehicle must also be free of dents, dirt, and grease. Can you imagine if Uber vehicles had to be free of dents, dirt, and grease? I have gotten into Ubers that, at least on the outside, were the dirtiest vehicles I've ever seen. And you've seen vehicles I've been on the inside of on this video. Some of those aren't much better. And have seats consistent in color and no more than 2 small holes. I don't know what consistent in color means. Does it mean you can't have a bright floral pattern? You can't have, a fuchsia in a white, blue, and yellow van? I don't know what that terminology means. Kind of irrelevant. We don't want to focus on that so much as a point that we're going to make afterwards. The airport contract requires Super Shuttle to provide at least 16 hours of driver training each year. That's interesting. But what does training mean? This language tends to be kind of vague. I will bet you. I can't say I bet you because, but it's my suspicion that Uber could get around that real easy. They could say, oh yeah, we provide 16 hours because they would say, well, we send out these little, tidbits of information in the app and in the email. And they might say, well, it takes the average driver 10 minutes to read it. And then they would make some videos and say, well, here's, so many hours of video. I suspect that that's how a company like Uber would get around it. So they have to have 16 hours of driver training on topics including disciplinary guidelines, dress standards, and customer service. They have dress standards. What if Uber made us comply with the dress standard? The contract prohibits cursing. How many Uber drivers have you seen using the most foul, guttural language you've ever seen? Soliciting, sleeping on the job, soliciting. Now we can't use, we can't promote things. We can't, I'm forgetting what it's called right now, but the thing where you can sell the items in your vehicle, candy bars and such, you couldn't do that. Sleeping on the job, loud, boisterous conduct, and consuming any food or drink in plain sight. Super Shuttle's franchise agreement lists 25 reasons for which Super Shuttle can fire drivers who, remember, are not employees. So do they use the language dismiss? Do they use the language fire? Do they use the language removed from the platform? What language do they use? We know what language Uber uses, right? Without recourse. Here is the labor board's main argument for why, in spite of all that, the drivers are independent business people. Franchisees set their own work schedules and select their own assignments. Super Shuttle does not set schedules or routes, does not require franchisees to be active during certain days or hours. Thus, franchisees have complete control over their schedules. See, what I think is really different here, though, you're entering into a franchisee agreement. QZ.com is really making a giant leap when they compare it to Uber. Just like when you franchise a McDonald's or a Subway, you have to do things a certain way. You can't start selling hot dogs at McDonald's unless they advertise that they're now going in the hot dog business. You can't sell a different line of soft drinks at Subway, because when you're a franchisee, there are certain things you have to abide by. You have to have a certain type of store. That's why you don't see McDonald's that look like Burger Kings. They have certain requirements. And that's what Super Shuttle is expecting of their franchisee. There is a huge difference between buying a franchise and just logging into an app. Now, I'm not saying there are not correlations that I'm going to draw here. What I'm saying is, I think that QZ.com is really making a humongous leap. So now they're proud of themselves, and they have a big exclamation point after this next phrase. There it is, complete control over the schedules, yada, yada, yada. So here's where they draw a comparison to Uber and where I want to have a big commentary. The argument is all but identical to the one Uber has made for years. Uber and most other ride-hailing companies hire their drivers as contractors, not employees. These drivers don't receive benefits, aren't entitled to minimum hourly wage, although that's changing, right? We're seeing that in some places they are trying to establish a minimum hourly wage for Uber. We'll talk about that in a minute. They're required to supply their own vehicles, pay their on-job expenses like gas and insurance. But Uber does provide insurance. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, wait a minute, Mark, come on. That insurance they provide has a lot of restrictions, limitations. It does. But you see, if you're trying to say, well, you pay all your own expenses, now Uber could come back and say, no, 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 we're paying insurance. You can't just look at the things that are beneficial to your argument. Because, yeah, it's really a good idea we have our own insurance. It's also a really good idea we buy supplemental rideshare insurance. But Uber will still argue, hey, we provide insurance. Uber sets the fares riders pay, wages drivers earn, and routes they are assigned through its routing software. I agree with that. But the company has long argued drivers set their own schedules and therefore are not employees. Now, here comes Uber's typical response. Nearly 90% of drivers say the main reason they use Uber is because they love being their own boss. Various Uber spokespersons have told me not being me being the author of this QZ.com piece, for years in stale and off-quoted statements, which, again, is their editorializing. Drivers use Uber on their own terms. This is, again, back to the quote. They control use of the app along with where and when they drive. Uber declined to comment on the Super Shuttle decision, as they probably should. It's not Uber. Completely unrelated business, completely unrelated model in that people are buying a franchise. That is hugely different. The employment status of Uber's drivers is one of the company's lingering question marks as it contemplates a 2019 initial public offering. This is huge. This is what we have been dancing around and kind of batting back and forth. This whole idea of, are they doing things to position themselves for that IPO? As Uber considers an IPO, it's been handed a big win. I think they are making, again, a massive leap here by thinking that this is tied in that tightly to Uber, just because this labor board in Dallas-Fort Worth deemed franchisees to be independent contractors. When you buy a franchise, you're pretty much saying, yeah, I'm buying my own business. So we didn't buy a franchise when we became Uber drivers. Uber drivers have a lot more freedom and choices. If Super Shuttle drivers with all the restrictions and prohibitions aren't employees in the eyes of NLRB, then Uber's case before the same board is no longer a question mark, it's a slam dunk, but Uber isn't in front of the same board nationwide or worldwide. Now, here is what I really want to focus on. We have been saying, do we want to be employees? No. But are we truly independent contractors? No. So where is this heading? Despite what QZ is doing, I don't see this as being a conservative liberal argument. I don't see this as being a Republican Democrat argument. I see this as being people interpreting the law. So my solution is we have to legally create a new designation. I think that when these labor laws were put in place, no one ever foresaw that there was going to be, the app-led employment. It's not a matter, are we independent contractors, are we employees? I don't think that's the issue here, because we're trying to apply it to a set of rules that were made when our situation didn't exist. I don't know what you think, but I'd love to hear your comments down below, because it sure seems to me like the answer to all this is not to make us employees, and it's not to make us fully independent contractors either. It's to create a new classification. Let me hear what you think. As always, I encourage you to like and share the videos. Please click that bell icon if you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Mark with Uber Hints.